And photography was still very much in the hands of professionals.
Yeah.
But by the late 1880s, everyone started to be able to carry a camera around and make their own photographs.
Yeah, there's the kind of this democratization of photography. And of course, interestingly, the development of, the fact that everybody's got a camera on their phone now. I've had interesting conversations with people, professional photographers in the last sort of 10 years who bemoan the fact that, well, now everybody thinks they're a photographer because they can just, they can whip out their phone, what does that do for us? My thought with that is I can imagine the same kind of problem being when, so what the kind of conversations scribes were having when reading and writing became more mass and more popular. Oh, great. So now everybody can read and write. That's us out of a job then. This isn't right. It should be left in the hands of the specialists, and yet for all the fact that everybody can now, write a Christmas card or text their girlfriend or whatever, doesn't necessarily mean everybody knows how to write a best-selling novel or even good sales copy. That you still go to a specialist to get the right kind of writing. And I think similarly, I love phones. I love the fact that everybody's out there because I think it sort of lifts people's knowledge of photography. It makes it so much more. And yeah, it's fine. There's lots of people thinking, hey, I could do this for myself. Obviously, as soon as you try and make a profession out of something, you realize there's a whole load more stuff that you would never take into consideration. But I think it's okay. I love the fact that people are more knowledgeable about visual aesthetics as such. They've got a sense of, well, that's working, that's not. And you no longer necessarily have the technology getting in the way of, it's like, I remember back when I started, analog photography, you take the photo, you don't know for 2 weeks whether you'd even taken the lens cap off, until you get the pictures back from the chemist or the pharmacy or whatever, you don't know what was in focus. These things, I line it up, I go click, oh, looks like you've got a plant growing out your head. Hang on, let me move around here. Click, oh, it's focused on the wall rather than on you. Click, oh, that looks good. 3 pictures and I've already bypassed 5 years worth of photography training on how to use the equipment.
And you don't have to worry about the airlines losing 50 rolls of film.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not costing, so it's not costing you a fortune. And I think that's brilliant. I think that so that people can get into being creative straight away and learn the visual language as well, which I think in turn makes it quite possibly really interesting for something like this collection, because you can look at the photos beyond just, is that my grandmother? Is that of my grandmother's generation? Am I really interested in it? To, well, what if I was doing my own version of this now? Oh, well, actually, that bunch of people in the boat, imagine those were my mates and we were deciding to recreate a photo like that. Now you can imagine exactly what it would be like. And that photo, which might have just been a static black and white image from some bit in history, sort of almost dismissive, suddenly gets full of life as you realize it's real people with different attitudes and interactions and power relationships, and our relationship, of course, with the photographer as well. So yeah, I think as the technology changes, our relationship with the camera changes, and as more people get it, each generation that had to learn the hard way bemoans the fact that the next generation seem to have it easier. But then I'm sure it would have been a case of, what do you mean you've created a bow and arrow? A spear was good enough for me, was good enough for my father and my father's father before him. You kids have no idea how lucky you've got, how good you've got it these days.
Well, we did have this phenomenon in the late 19th century, even with photography being such a young medium at that point. Keeping in mind that photography was only introduced to the world in 1839. Yeah. So even today, I think we can consider it, compared with painting and forms of sculpture and drawing, a very young visual medium, and perhaps one that we're still, sorting out in a way, in terms of our relationship with it. And in the late 19th century, at that point in which you could go to the chemist and buy a camera that was already loaded up with film, and make the photographs with that, send it off, and get the photographs and a new roll of film loaded up in your camera back. You had professional photographers saying, "Whoa, wait a minute, hang on." Yes, everybody can do this, but not everybody can do this. If you know what I'm saying, and that was one of the ideas among photographers who considered themselves artists, was to say that this is not a 100% mechanical medium. Yes, push the button and we do the rest. That's one way of making an image, but we aim to show that photography can also be manipulated, arguably to not dissimilar degrees as a painting or a sculpture, and not just in the darkroom, but from, as photographers later in the 20th century would say, all the way from the sort of pre-visualization and intent behind an image, all the way to how that photograph is presented, every step along the way.
Yeah.
And so I wonder, based upon something that you said a moment ago, as far as where we are right now, how do you think we'll look back from future decades and say, oh, well, we hadn't quite sorted that one out yet, but here we are. Are there any aspects of photography that you think that we're living with right now that in future decades we'll look back and think, wow, we had some work to do there?
Well, I think it's strange. I mean, I do kind of feel there's a sort of transition period with the growth of the mobile phone photography. And of course, mobile phones are becoming incredibly sophisticated now. If your phone's 4 years old, it may as well be of the time of the dinosaurs. The cameras just aren't, whereas modern cameras now have it's not just a case of it will take the photo. It has all sorts of computers and algorithm programs going in to bring down the highlights, to boost up the shadows so you can get in detail in awkward lighting conditions, and it will do it all for you. It has face recognition, image stabilization. You've only got to pretty much wave it roughly in the right direction and you'll get an okay photo. And for most people, okay is good enough. But I think the thing about photography is, and the value of photography and the value of photos, is that they grow almost exponentially over time. If I take a photograph of you today, how much is this photo worth? Really, virtually nothing. I could take 10 of them and none of them stands out necessarily. Tomorrow, you're going to look pretty much the same. In 5 years' time, that photo we now look at and we go, oh, look how when I had more hair and I was lighter and it wasn't as grey or whatever. And in 10 years' time, even more so. And in 20 years' time, are you still around? Are your children, your grandchildren now looking back going, oh, do you remember when? I've had these conversations with wedding photographers who are always frustrated at people they'll spend tens of thousands of pounds on their wedding. And then as an afterthought, oh, we better get a wedding photographer. And they will just sort of look around for the cheapest wedding photographer they can find. And yet, 20 years down the line, the wedding photos are probably the most important part of that wedding, more important than any other bit of it, because it's now the gateway to the memories. You will never have the chance to have all those people in that place at the same time again. You won't be that young again. You won't have that part of the life. And so if you got in the person who didn't really know what they were doing, it becomes really noticeable. So I've always said, get the best wedding photography you can. Whatever else you're doing, either budget for the wedding photographer first and then work everything else. And I say this, I don't do wedding photography. But I always said, but that notion then that photos become more important through time, I think, because of the way we see that, we see the photos of our parents when they were young, or our grandparents, or our great-grandparents. I've got a photo of my great-grandfather in regalia. He was an officer during the Boer War for the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders. And that's the only photo I have of him. I've got no idea what he was like as a person, but that is the single entry point to my great-grandfather. So the photos we have now are disposable. We upload them to the internet, we look at them on Facebook, we click like on Instagram, and then it's gone. What starts to become interesting is now I notice Facebook is now every day pushes Facebook memories. And if you've been on Facebook for 10 years, suddenly periodically these little images come up that you put up 10 years ago. And now you start to get that effect again, even though they were digital, even though they were taken with your phone, even though they were just casual throwaway images of your lunch in that particular cafe. Suddenly there's a connection with them. There's something that's interesting about them. And I think the bigger the distance in time, the more powerful, the more valuable those photos become. So it becomes really difficult to judge at the moment which photos are valuable, because in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, that's when it's going to become really noticeable which photos were the most valuable.